February 15th, 1898. Some sailors shout on deck the USS Maine. Suddenly, it explodes. Although the U.S. Navy armored cruiser USS Maine sunk, killing 266 sailors, because of an internal explosion due to a mysterious accident, it veritably initiated the Spanish-American War. The President of the United States, William McKinley, didn't want to go to war, and neither did the business community. Theodore Roosevelt, not yet president but a major future player, decided that he did want war on points of interest such as the sugarcane and coffee in Cuba, but even more so on a humanitarian standpoint and on a standpoint of national honor. Also, the majority of the Democratic Party wished for war. Two feuding New York journalists, Pulitzer and Hearst, took advantage of the opportunity and wrote sensationalist stories to sell more newspapers. In Cuba, Spanish General Weyler put 1.5 million Cubans into reconcentration camps, which had inadequate food, shelter, medical care, and water. Consequently, Pulitzer and Hearst called General Weyler a butcher. When the Maine sunk, they published misleading articles suggesting that the Spanish had sabotaged the ship, labeling it an atrocity and murder. Eventually, misleading and exaggerating articles came to be known as yellow journalism. Whether it was due to this or not, American public opinion called for war. So President McKinley and his administration were pushed by the Democrats into a war they had originally wished to avoid. In fact, before the Maine exploded, the U.S. only had 25,000 troops. The night after it sunk, 100,000 people signed up, eventually adding to 220,000 troops. On April 21st, Spain cut diplomatic relations with the U.S., and the U.S. Navy blockaded Cuba. On April 23rd, Spain declared that it would declare war if the U.S. invaded its territory. On April 25th, the U.S. decided that war had actually existed since they began the blockade. Also, they sent an ultimatum to Spain, but Spain didn't reply soon enough, so the U.S. assumed that Spain had ignored the warning. Soon after, U.S. expeditionary forces ventured onto Cuban soil, facing a Spanish garrison plagued by Cuban insurgent attacks and yellow fever. In Manila Bay, in the Philippines, on May 1st, a U.S. squadron under General Dewey fought with and defeated a Spanish squadron. After that battle, the bay filled with British, German, French, and Japanese forces. The officers on board the U.S. ships were especially annoyed at the German ships, who disrespectfully cut in front of other ships. In San Juan Bay, in Puerto Rico, on May 12th, 10 United States ships under the command of Rear Admiral Sampson were seen in the harbor. Under the delusion that the bulk of the Spanish fleet was headed to San Juan under Admiral Topete, Sampson had decided to leave Havana, defeat the Spanish squadron on his way to Puerto Rico, and when he got there, focus on secondary goals like forts. However, the fleet arrived to an empty harbor. Sampson ordered his gunners to bombard the citadels of San Juan, partly to test his sailors. Among the defenders were Captains Camaño and Iriarte, who based themselves at the Fort Castillo San Felipe de Moro. The battle lasted 3 hours. Justo Esquivias became the first Puerto Rican to be killed in the Puerto Rico campaign, as it was called. This battle later became known as the Bombardment of San Juan. The fleet had inflicted plenty of damage on San Juan without sustaining much damage themselves. Sampson ordered a ceasefire. Then Sampson, nearly out of coal and ammo, retired to Havana but left a blockade. In Upper Harbor, in Guam, on June 20th, Captain Glass steamed into the harbor aboard the USS Charleston, having been ordered to capture the island. He ordered his sailors to fire. They did, a total of 12 rounds. However, they were confused because they received no return fire. Suddenly, one spotted a boat approaching the ship, with 4 officials in it. When they climbed aboard, the officials found themselves taken prisoner. They explained to Captain Glass that they were coming out to apologize, because Guam didn't even have enough ammo to return the salute. In return, Glass informed them that they were at war. The next day, a surrender was arranged. However, the U.S. didn't have enough troops to occupy Guam. The only U.S. citizen living on the island offered to look after things until the war ended. Near Las Guasimas in Cuba on June 22nd to 24th, American General Wheeler led some troops, ignoring Cuban scouts' warning of danger and orders to proceed with caution. They engaged a Spanish division, proving that American soldiers could think quickly when typical maneuvers wouldn't work. The Spanish hid in bushes invisible, so the Americans did too. Not able to see the Americans because they were all hidden, the Spanish used untargeted mass volley fire to take them down. However, this technique was unproductive because the U.S. soldiers learned to duck whenever they heard the word fuego. But the battle ended in favor of Spain because the American forces were ambushed. In San Juan Bay in Puerto Rico on June 22nd to July 15th, two more sea battles occurred that were detrimental to the Spanish. During the second incident, sailors carried as much valuable cargo as they could off the Spanish ship Antonio Lopez before the USS New Orleans sank it, 20 shells. Near Santiago de Cuba in Cuba on July 1st, the bloodiest and most famous battle of the Spanish-American War occurred here, with the Americans fighting to take San Juan Hill. The Americans won. In this battle, the Spanish lost nearly a third of their force, but the U.S. lost 5 times as many people as the Spaniards did. Quotes about it abound, and many paintings were made depicting it. In Guanica, in Puerto Rico on July 25th, American General Miles led a fleet of ships to invade Puerto Rico by way of Fajardo, because they believed the Spanish were expecting an attack on the north coast and consequently fortified it better. However, Miles decided to attack instead on Guanica because it would be easier. Guanica was a barrio in Jauco of 60 houses and a total defense of 11 militiamen. The lighthouse keeper spotted the fleet and alerted everyone. With the exception of a few people who welcomed the invaders, the population fled to Jauco with the lighthouse keeper. After a skirmish with the Puerto Rican militia, 3,300 American soldiers disembarked. A day later, the Secretary of War read about Miles' invasion by way of Guanica. Since he had been ordered to attack San Juan, the Secretary was quite surprised. If Miles' attack had not gone as smoothly, he would have been disciplined. Near the city of Manila, in the Philippines, on August 1st, the Americans obtained the besieged Manila after the Battle of Manila. The Filipinos resented the fact that they were not allowed to enter their own city, and this caused an even more costly Filipino-American war later on. On August 1st to August 13th, in Puerto Rico, the American forces set out to take Puerto Rico, fighting its way from Guanica to Jauco, then Fajardo, then Guayama, then Coamo, then Mayagüez, then Ay Bonito. The Puerto Rico campaign ended on August 13th when the American troops got word of a treaty. The 1898 Treaty of Paris officially ended the war, passing the Senate by only 1 vote. Hold on a sec. Ever notice how many treaties been made in Paris? Alright, continue. It was favorable to the United States, with Spain ceding control of Guam, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and temporary control of Cuba to the U.S. The U.S. paid $20 million to Spain for Filipino infrastructure damages. The loss of these colonies virtually ended the Spanish Empire, prompting a philosophic and artistic reevaluation of Spanish society. Because more American troops died of food poisoning by eating spoiled canned beef, Theodore Roosevelt eventually founded the FDA. Several years later, President Roosevelt signed a deal with the new Cuban government, leasing Guantanamo Bay to the U.S. for roughly $4,000 annually. Although the state still sends rent to Cuba to this day, Fidel Castro's administration refuses to cash the checks. In fact, before the war, Cubans and Puerto Ricans worked together for their independence. A man named Pachín Marín most likely designed Cuba's and Puerto Rico's flag, which share most of the symbolism. Also before the war, Spain had decided to give Puerto Rico autonomy, which was a major achievement. However, only a few weeks before it would formally begin, the United States took control and established a military government. This 10-week war affected many islands, including Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, and Cuba, as well as the United States and Spain in many ways. Over a century later, some of the results are obvious. Some can only be discovered by looking further.